Welcome to another Thursday night Bible study, brought to you as a ministry of SIGBC.
And we started a series called the Be series, things that God desires that we as Christians be. And today we are going to begin another series of studies, a series of 3 studies actually, on the subject of be content. Because God calls us to be content in all things in life. But if God asks us to do something, He usually also gives us a way to make it possible for us to do just that. And so today we're going to be beginning by contemplating the 3 areas that God desires of us in His call to be content. In 2024, we just introduced our latest church motto. And our latest church motto is be grateful. And if you were there on Sunday, then you were able to get in on the announcement of our church motto for the year. Be grateful is actually directly connected to God's call to be content. Because it is easier to be content as we are able to be grateful. And it's also easier to be grateful as we are able to be content. So these two actually go hand in hand, which is why we begun the year with the contemplation of the subject. Even though our motto is be grateful, we begin the year with the contemplation of the subject, be content. Now, when it comes to the idea of contentment, we'll talk more about the Greek and the Hebrew meanings of these words as they appear in the Old and New Testament in our upcoming studies in the subject of be content. But when we talk about contentment in our own lives, how do we usually define contentment? Do we say that contentment is acknowledging that we have enough? Do we say contentment is being happy with what we have? Do we say contentment is feeling satisfied in God's goodness? There are lots of different ways to define contentment for the Christian. And they would all probably be biblical definitions surrounding the idea itself. As we look at the scriptures, we find that at least in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6, we find that the admonition to contentment is the acknowledgement that God is our helper. And in all circumstances in life, God is there with us, to guide us, to protect us, to lead us, to provide for us. And so as God is there with us all the time, then we acknowledge His goodness, we gratefully acknowledge His goodness, and then we can recognize that God calls us to be content in His goodness, however that goodness might be expressed. Because the reality is, sometimes what we desire is not what's best for us. And sometimes the simplest desires of our heart, when God provides them, we are able to be content. The opposite of that is when we desire more than we need, or when we desire something for personal gain or status or pleasure, that God knows is not going to be good for us, then when God withholds that which is not good for us, then it's difficult to be content with such things as we have when we desire more, and God has not allowed us to have that which we think we need or want. In Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6, we read, "Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have." Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" In the book of Hebrews, we find that contentment for the Christian involves three basic ideas. Number one, it begins with a heart decision to keep our lives free from the love of money. In other words, it's a conscious decision to say, I will not pursue in life my personal gain, my personal pleasures, my personal goals. I will not pursue in life everything that I might dream of or have a passion about or desire to pursue. In other words, since the Bible describes the love of money as the root or a root, depending on how you translate that particular passage, of all kinds of evil or of all evil itself, since God defines the love of money in negative terms, it is understandable that contentment and the ability to keep our lives free from the love of money go hand in hand. Remember that we are called to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if you think of the subject of heart and soul and mind and strength, that is basically everything that we have and everything that we are is supposed to be focused on our love for God, not for our love for ourselves. In fact, we're supposed to love our neighbors as we tend to love ourselves. The criteria for loving others is the way that we would naturally love ourselves. And so the first call that is the basis for being content as a Christian is to keep our lives free from the love of money. Doesn't mean you can't pursue financial gain. It doesn't mean you can't pursue financial prosperity. It does mean that our affections do not belong to our funds. It's interesting, isn't it, that money is just a tool. And yet it is the tool that is studied the most, talked about the most, on the news the most, sought after the most. In fact, more wrong is done for the sake of this tool than perhaps anything else. And so God says, keep yourselves from the love of money. This is number one. The second principle we find here is the call to choose to be content with what you have. We can choose to be content with what we have, or we can choose to desire more, want more, feel like we need more, that we're lacking, that we can't be happy without having something else in our lives. Something is missing. And you've probably seen the cartoons where there's a guy, Fabio just sent this one to me the other day, where there's a guy who is in bed, sick, looking out the window, and he sees a guy who is standing at the bus stop, and he says, oh man, I wish I could walk. And the guy that's at the bus stop is looking over at a guy on a bicycle, saying, man, I wish I had a bicycle. And the guy on a bicycle is looking over at a guy driving a car, saying, man, I wish I had a car. See, that's the idea behind choosing discontent in our lives. In other words, rather than acknowledging the good that we have, in spite of what other people might have as well, instead of acknowledging the good that we have, we choose discontent. And so after saying, be careful, be careful, be careful, keep your lives free from the love of money, the writer of the book of Hebrews says, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, choose to be content with what you have. That doesn't mean you can't pursue more. but we can't make the pursuit of more the basis for whether or not we're happy. And then thirdly, we find the why. Why should we be content with what we have? And the writer of the book of Hebrews, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, gives the answer to that. He says, remember, God has said to you, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. God is with us in every aspect and area of life. And if we have a God who we know loves us, who protects us, who guides us, who disciplines us when we need correction, who helps us in our daily walk with Him, who judges us of and convicts us of sin and righteousness and judgment. God is with us at all times, which means He knows what we need. In fact, in the book of Matthew, chapter 6, Jesus, when teaching His disciples on prayer, said, and not worrying, but instead praying, He said, look, God knows what you need before you even ask Him. So seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and then all these things will be added unto you. So, number one, keep your lives free from the love of money. Number two, choose to be content with what you have. And number three, remember that God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. The conclusion of this thought comes in the words, so we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? In other words, with God at my side, I fear nothing. With God at my side, I fear no one. And what God provides, I choose to gratefully appreciate and enjoy. Remember what I said at the beginning? Be grateful and be content go hand in hand, because it's only as we are grateful for that which God has provided for us that we can be content with what He has given to us daily.
Thank you for listening. You can also join us in person or live on Facebook every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Japan time. This has been a ministry of Sakahogi International Grace Baptist Church.